Divinest rise. Grand rise, blessed be to your day. May be everything you require to create everything that you desire. One of the, This is gonna be a nice little pre-build of. Today we're gonna do a little pre-build on before we get into delusions of grandeur, or deceptions of grandeur rather. Delusions or deceptions of grandeur. Deceptions or delusions of grandeur, which we're gonna be getting into tomorrow night. Are you the passive approach? I asked a question earlier. I made a post earlier. And the question was, are the conversations with yourself active or passive? The conversation you're having with yourself, when you first wake up, before you go to bed, before you make any type of decisions, rather than just a regular build aspect of the day, is your conversation that you're having with yourself passive or active? This can be reflected, and you'll see, like, we understand that our space is our opportunity, or everything that's based on that very thought, passive or active. When I remember being passive, I remember having passive thoughts. That means I was always in a space of, I would have the thought, I would hold on to it for a little bit, think about it, then somehow or some way I would get talked up out of it. Even if I didn't talk myself up out of it, the energy that I held with that conversation with myself, just having that conversation, whether I was thinking about it through doubt or whatever, an unseen aspect, I noticed that in my space, until I realized it, and when I realized it, we can build. I noticed that everything in my space matched that in the reaction. It flattered it. So if I really didn't want to go nowhere, using a simple example, if I really didn't want to go nowhere, you really don't want to go nowhere, you kind of sit in your mind and you'll say something like, if they don't call me before 9 o'clock, I'm good. I won't answer the phone anyway. After 9 o'clock, I won't answer the phone. And then when they call me tomorrow, they text me tomorrow, I'll be like, I was asleep. That's passive. That's the passive way of thought. You didn't create a boundary. You didn't create a space. When we actively are thinking, when we're using our thought process of active thought, the active process of thought, this is when we're able to create a boundary. So using that same conversation, I'm not going nowhere after 9. Let me actively send out a text message, make phone calls, and be like, if y'all talking about going out after 9 o'clock, I'm not going. Letting you know now. Don't text me. Don't call me. I won't answer the phone if you try to hit me up after 9 o'clock. So if it's not before 9 o'clock, I'm gonna end up not going. And then being more and more active in these conversations with myself. After I said, okay, cool. That means I want to be in the house by 9 o'clock. Even if I'm not doing anything, doesn't matter. I want to be in the house by 9 o'clock. So that means that now that I'm actively set this boundary, I can build on it. I can build on this boundary. This is going into the aspects of that our codependency, or having this when we're having conversations with ourselves and building with ourselves. The more active that one becomes in their internal work, the more that they see the multiple streams that are presented before them. When we are approaching things from a passive approach, we're in this space with ourselves where we only see one stream. We only see one way of doing it. We only see one way of doing it. Therefore, we only hope for one way of doing it. That way, we only cope through one way of doing it. That's the passive approach. It's all in your conversation. You can think about you being in the aspect of being passive aggressive. How do you ask questions? How do you express yourself? How do you speak? How do you bring yourself? What tone do you use? How are you saying the things that you're saying? Are you really assessing are you really assessing? The first assessment is the conversation with yourself. We have to learn that the first conversation that is going to be used as assessment is the one that you have with yourself every day. You got a lot of it when we're going through these traumatic experiences, go through a traumatic experience, these events, these nodes, all these aspects, we get used to being inside of a space where we react based on a passive approach. Because in our mind, through the passive aspect, we recall. Through the passive aspect, you recall. Therefore, you listen. Therefore, you react. Therefore, every time you have that passive thought, you go back into your memory bank. You remember a time back in 1996. You remember a time back in 2003. And then you bring that to the forefront to project. So now you're having a conversation through the projection. So break down an example. You tell your boyfriend, or you tell your girl, you tell your boyfriend, your lady, your mom, whoever. You telling somebody, and you're like, I'm taking this next week to myself for self-care. Let's say you say it to your girl. You're giving yourself a day to yourself for self-care, meditation, journaling to yourself. And you say, okay, cool, I'm going out of town to do this. They can use a passive approach to directing to you, because now they're going to go back in their memory bank. They're going to remember a time where somebody in their life went somewhere and did something along that similar lines and didn't come back. It can go all the way back to when their dad, literally, because we don't know, because we don't explore it. They can go back to a moment in time to where they've been using that same emotional channel that they haven't dealt with, that wound they haven't dealt with, and then they can pull all the way back from the time that their dad said he was going to the store to go grab a bottle of milk and never came back. And then ever since then, that's what's been inside of their space. So their passive reaction has nothing to do with you. This is something that we have to understand when we're having conversations. This is something that's very important when we're having these conversations, because conversations are meant to be from we're in a space of balance. It is not meant to be defensive. When we're stuck in that passive mindset, we're always in that state of defense. We're always looking for a reaction. I remember always trying to have something smart to say. Still do it, but it's different now. Because before, when I had something smart to say, it was like, ooh, I said something smart, said something real witty, real funny, or I said something real cutthroat. But then followed by that was their reaction, and then I could explain it. Before, when I was in that passive approach, I really didn't give a fuck how you really felt. I was like, I shot at you, you cried, you upset, whatever. That was all based on me staying within that behavior that was based in anger, based in rejection, based in not being abandoned, still stuck in those old wounds. I was taking a passive approach to my life. I noticed that I was taking a passive approach to our life. Most of us notice that we take this passive approach to our life because we are heavily dependent upon the external before we actually look into the aspects of the internal. When you are active, when you are actively in your internal work, when you are actively saying it's time for me to sit down with myself, have these conversations. If I need to get some counseling, if I need to get some therapy, I need to get this shit up out of me. I got to get this poison up out of me. When you're actively doing that, everything in your space you see works for you. When you're taking that from a passive approach, that means you'll sit there and tell yourself, yeah, I need to go work out. Or, yeah, I got some trust issues from my father. Yeah, I got some trust issues from my mother. But the passive approach, you'll automatically build out and be like, but it is what it is. That's my life. Someone's going to accept me for it. If they don't, they accept me, then I'm cool. I'm used to being left. You start this downward spiral of talking negative. So now, remember, everything that you say programs your space. So from that passive approach, you saying that out loud, you programming your whole space to be in that same concordance. So now you got six. Now you got like 7 to 8 friends, all got father issues. You got six. You got every relationship that you're getting in, somebody has a father issue or a dad issue or the reflected of an issue, and you're taking the passive approach to it because the passive approach also builds the predestination of an identity. It builds that predestination of an identity. So now you go into the space, you in that relationship. The relationship comes to a certain point, you're stuck within the passive approach, so you're stuck within the behaviors of time. So now at a certain point in time, you're like, this should have happened here. This, because when? Where did you get that first example? Where was your first example of that? I remember being in like earlier relationships being like I had so much expectancy from a passive approach. And the only time that I seen that I was active I wasn't even really active. It was more based on it was the passiveness was feeding from my already present aggression. So I was already an angry ass person. I was already an emotional ass person. Either I was extra emotional or I wasn't emotional at all. But that passive approach had me approaching it either overly aggressive or detached. And then I would use these joints in tandem. So if I was overly aggressive, I found myself in that passive approach, overly aggressive, get angry, yell, my trust issues come up, my insecurities come up. And then the moment that it was brought back down, or they would say something that would catch me off guard that I couldn't say something to, I couldn't respond to, I would automatically go back into what would be, ooh, I'm all lovey-dovey again. I love you. That's a similar sense in the bipolarism. So I'm sitting there doing this over and over and over again. Every relationship was the same relationship. Every relationship became the same relationship. So even when I was good in a relationship, for an example, even when I was good inside of a relationship, since I did not yet deal with that aspect, I didn't become actively dealing with that aspect in my space. I needed something that was a conduit to match what I thought, so I could keep that thought present. So I didn't have to deal with the thought. It was sitting right there, had something to deal with it, sitting there in front of me. So now I'm good in my relationship. My relationship's all beautiful and all going fun and flowers and shit and all nice and great. But now I got my homeboy with his taking the stepdad role for a kid that's damn near 3 years younger than him. And I'm feeding from that. His conversations, I'm feeding from that because I need that chaos. I need that aspect in my life so I can passively feed. So I can always say or take on the identity that my relationship is not like that relationship. But not understanding the only reason I can see that relationship, I see that friendship, I see that conflict, is because that conflict corresponds with something that's going on inside of me that I haven't dealt with. Once we start to actively deal with our internal, that becomes seen. The more that we do our internal work, we're doing that shadow work. Here's one of the biggest signs when you start doing that, when you're doing your shadow work, doing your internal work actively. When you go into the space where the conduit of where you took residence at to cope with it or deal with it, it's going to irritate you. It's going to irritate the fuck out of your spirit. The longer that you go over there, you're going to go from the irritation to now you're going back into avoid it because you're going to reopen the wound. You're going to reopen the wound. So now you go back to avoidance. So now, when you go into that space, this is one way to monitor it. Think about how you eat when you're in certain spaces. Think about how you eat whenever you go around certain people. When you go to certain places, think about what you partake in and why you partake in it. And you usually don't even do that. You know, you have that clear notice, like, I don't do this. That I don't eat this. I don't do this. I don't do these things. But every time I'm in this space, I find myself compensating, because that's what we're doing. You're compensating for the energy that you're losing inside of that space. You're compensating for the energy you're losing in that space. You're not a drinker. You didn't stop drinking. You drinking one drink. You taking like a shot, 2 shots a week, and a drink every Friday, whatever, or some wine with dinner. But every time you going over there into that space, you find yourself over drinking. You're starting to eat even more healthier. You're starting to eat less cheese. You starting to eat less cheese and less red meat, whatever you're trying to beat into your diet. But every time you go into that space, you always seem to go, I'm going to go eat this burger. I'm going to go eat this double cheeseburger with bacon on it. You ain't eaten swine in like 9 years, but every time you go into that event, you find yourself eating this weird shit. That's the passive approach. Your body is naturally, your lower self is the passive. Your lower self, your urges, those are the passives. Your higher self is your active. Your higher self is the active aspect. This is the dark aspect. Your lower self is the lower self is within that aspect of the darkness that you got to deal with as you're switching it around. These things now become the new darkness. It's time to switch off and start becoming more active in yourself. As I've said we went over the last couple of weeks, it's the unseen, the unhealed, the undealt with, the repressed. It's those aspects that you have not dealt with that create your space. Those are what are reflected inside of your space. Those are what's going to be showing up in your space. That's what's happening inside of your space. It's the unseen. It's the undealt with. It's the dad issues. It's the mother issues. It's the auntie, the family issues. It's the family secrets. It's the roots and the curses that could have been possibly been placed on later on in the life, from what grandmother did to grandpa 3, 4 generations, 5 generations ago. Those are the aspects that you have to deal with, because those are the things that are creating your space. Those are the things that a lot of us, until we deal with those things, and this leads into what we're getting deeper into on Friday, tomorrow, when we get into these deceptions of grandeur, the deceptions or the delusions of grandeur. You cannot build your space based on the expectancy through your trauma. You are not getting anything through your trauma. If you have not learned anything in your first levels of my shadow work, I had to accept and learn that I was not going to gain anything through my trauma. As long as I wasn't acknowledging my trauma, and then when you look at media, you look at everything that's in this space, from you listen to rap, you listen to music, you listen to rap music, you watch TV, movies, all of this shit is basically based on your trauma. It feeds off of your trauma. You looking at Pornhub, go look on a porn site and go type in stepdaddy or stepmother does daughter. It's your trauma. This space is fed by your trauma. So you're not going to get anything from your trauma. If you've even noticed that you have it, you can get something. I'm going to put it like this. You can get something from your trauma, but you'll never maintain it. That's the whole purpose of dealing with your trauma. The whole purpose of integrating with your shadow. So you don't have to go through that one stream to become your greatest self. I want you to be the fucking best. I desire you to be the fucking best. This week's episode of the God Hour Podcast is out now. If you're interested with this service, hit me in the inbox. I'm running the special. $100 off of your start, $100 off of the session with that booking of an appointment, or you can go ahead and get that consultation, Get that consultation in, get that reading in. You just want to get a little spiritual advisory call in, natal chart analysis, all that good stuff, and so many more aspects. Serious inquiries only. Hit me in the inbox. Hit me in the DM. I want you to be the best. I desire you to be the best. The only way to become the best, is to accept and deal with the shit that you're not dealing with. It's time to tap into that unseen. You're unseen, you're unhealed, you're unseen, you're repressed, the things that you keep trying to keep in that box, aka your subconscious, that's what's creating your space. If you want different results, you want a different environment, deal what's in that little black box. We have to deal with what's inside of those shadows. I love you, we love us. Ashe.